compared to what now happens, where it's just like, we can just assassinate anyone, we can kidnap heads of state, etc. I mean, I think Dick Cheney, if he was alive today, would just be like looking at Donald Trump and seeing like, why did we waste all this time even pretending that we needed to follow any laws whatsoever?
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So glad to have you here. Today, as you can see, we have Jeremy Scahill, and I'm going to be reacting to his latest interview that just dropped with Al Jazeera. I saw this video first and I found it quite interesting because of certain things that he actually said, and actually just wanted to share my opinion about it and just show how one-sided global media is at the moment. Because if you actually think about it, you only hear the information from one side and you barely or never hear the perspective of the other side. And most importantly, we need to, obviously, when there's a global conflict or something that is important that will affect us, we should strive to hear the side of the other people that we are told to hate or don't like or find them irrational and so on. Jeremy Scahill here is a very important investigative journalist, and he's broken a couple of major stories in the past when it comes to Blackwater, the PMCs, the Iraq War, and so on. And most importantly, the job he's doing right now when it comes to DROPSITE news is most eye-opening. Before we do get into it, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers. I don't think it's too much to ask, and obviously this always motivates me to do more. So yeah, let's get into it.
Award-winning investigative journalist Jeremy Scahill. He's the author of Blackwater and Dirty Wars, which uncover the expansion of US covert operations around the world. Jeremy is co-founder of DROPSITE News. Jeremy, welcome to Al Jazeera in Frame.
It's my honor to be here.
You've spent decades working on US wars and documenting them in great detail, from the death squads in Iraq to the drone campaigns of the Obama years and the genocide in Gaza under both President Trump and President Biden. But as you watch the chaotic few months of 2026, from the abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to the repeated threats on Greenland to the blockade of Cuba and Operation Epic Fury, as it's called, on Iran, I have to ask, who is running US foreign policy right now?
You know, I think there's a tendency, because Trump is such a cartoonish villain and is constantly saying the quiet part out loud, and he's constantly telling lies, big and small, to perceive this moment as some kind of extraordinary moment in history. And in some ways it is. But I think if you break down your question, we're talking about some of the most violent and obscene strands of American empire history all coming together under Trump. You mentioned the abduction of Nicolas Maduro. This is reminiscent of the early stages of the CIA, when the U.S. started to expand its covert operations in Central Latin America, the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran. So Trump is pulling from that. Trump, when he first came to power in 2016, was constantly denouncing the neoconservatives. Well, this time around in Trump 2.0, the neocons are in control of a large portion of American foreign policy. And then you, of course, have the sameness of American foreign policy under both Democrats and Republicans, the continuity from Bush to Obama to Biden to Trump. That's all present, but there's an added dimension which is profiting off of the White House in an unprecedented manner.
You know, what he actually said is so on the point, because in 2016, Donald Trump ran on the premise that we are not gonna go into all these never-ending wars. We need to concentrate on America only, and mostly that's how he won. And 2016, when he got into power, he actually tried to follow through on this, but obviously was inexperienced. He didn't have anybody that he could actually just put into the role that were loyal to him and so on. So we had likes of John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and all this, and you just saw how it all ended. He just fired them. And also the point that he actually alluded to, that the policy went from Bush, Obama to Trump and also to Biden. It's just been the oneness. It's just the same thing. There's literally no change. Whoever you vote for, you get McCain, how they say.
But all that said, you know, Trump did campaign on ending the forever wars. He was supposedly the candidate of peace. And then, of course, he's launched what many would claim and argue is the most reckless US assault in a generation. What changed?
I think that there is a Benjamin Netanyahu, Miriam Adelson wing of the Trump base that essentially has purchased, on the one hand, a very core part of American foreign policy, and then won an internal battle within Trump land on this. I think the fact that the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is so close to Netanyahu, but also his business dealings are totally immersed in both Gulf money and Israeli projects. So there's an ideological component to it of the people around Trump, but Trump himself is not an ideological guy. And I think that part of why we saw this difference from Trump 1 to Trump 2 is that there was also a financial component. Mariam Adelson was the chief fundraiser and donor to Donald Trump, and I think we're looking at a transaction for the benefit of Israel in large part.
That
On his actual second point, it's actually so poignant in the sense that in 2016, there was not as much infiltration of the people important, like such as Miriam Alderson and Jared Kushner and all of them. There was not as much influence. But in Trump 2.0, is the total opposite. They literally bought him, like they rented the White House out for some reason. Like, and these people have got such a hold on an American foreign policy. In my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of experts, this is what everybody thinks, that if there's never been this case, and Donald Trump was elected mainly just to focus on America alone, and in this case, his White House has been hijacked.
that brings up for me a kind of contradiction, which is, you've argued, in fact, that Trump has been telling sources that he wants to be remembered as the president who forever ended the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and that he wants it done before the midterms. Now, that's a big claim, right? No matter what we think of Trump, as ideological or not, I think we can argue that he wants to be remembered as the guy that gets the job done, which fundamentally means he needs resolution of some kind. I would argue that Israel's motives are exactly the opposite, which is a kind of anti-resolution, a forever destabilization of the region. How do these two contradictory motives then work?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I understand is that, Trump has been sold on the idea of his greatness as an American president when it comes to foreign policy. And I think that he was sold on the idea of running the deck, that what you did in Venezuela can be replicated elsewhere. And in the deliberations ahead of the February 28th launching of the war against Iran, Trump did start to talk increasingly among his advisors and people briefing him about being the man who forever changed the Iranian regime. And I think that essentially he was being fluffed up by people who had their own reasons for wanting to go to war against Iran. The reason why I say that he's not ideological is that I don't think that Trump is driven by a greater Israel project. I don't think Trump is a particularly religious man. I don't think Trump even particularly likes Benjamin Netanyahu. I think that Donald Trump can be sold on ideas, but if the bottom line is always secure, which is setting up financial prospects for his family and his cronies, he leans into that. And I think that's a huge factor in all of this.
You've reported extensively on the privatization of war. So even this phenomenon isn't altogether new, right? From Blackwater in Iraq to the mercenary architecture of the war on terror. And as you've just argued, of course, now you have, his son-in-law Kushner with business interests in the Gulf, Steve Witkoff's son Alex, who's making, business deals just as his father is negotiating peace deals in the region. Who are these people?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is before the Americans, for the second time in 1 year, pretended to be engaged in negotiations only to turn around and then launch a surprise massive bombing campaign against Iran, one of the things that Iranian negotiators were contemplating was offering huge oil and natural resources concessions to the United States as...
What he's actually saying is true, because Iranians, while they were engaged in the second round of negotiation, they were giving so many concessions to Americans, even a deal better than the previously accepted Obama JCPOA deal. There was not going to be sunset clauses in this. It was just going to be fixed, and they were not going to enrich to a certain level. It was way better for Donald Trump, and Donald Trump should have just taken that win. You should have just taken it, just like the Oman foreign minister came. He came to America literally on the 27th of February, said the Iranians have accepted this deal. They are looking forward to it, and it's not an advantage if there's a military action taken. But we all know how that turned out.
Part of the negotiations that were supposedly about nuclear. I spoke to Iranian sources that described the process of trying to come up with a package that would appeal to this part of Trump. It's extraordinary if we think about it, because all of these deals that were made with the United Arab Emirates, with other Gulf countries when Trump, went on his tour there, Gulf Arab countries have to be thinking, are we talking with President Trump or businessman Trump? It's an extraordinarily unusual situation that these countries have to deal with. It's a huge question.
I mean, that's an interesting question because we're not just talking about the privatization of military contracts, which again, we've seen in the past as well, under Obama, under Biden, but a privatization of all of the state's architecture, right? It's diplomacy fundamentally. And taking it a step further, privatization of the United Nations, privatization of the global governance architecture, as we've seen with the Board of Peace or, a stabilization force that's fundamentally private. You've worked very closely on kind of taking apart the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. What did you find there?
Look, the Board of Peace, this whole scam is one of the lowest points in the history of the United Nations.
Actually, you find you can call the Board of Peace with a PIEC because everybody's getting a peace. And the United Nations actually just underwriting this whole thing is just so stupid because United Nations is meant to be where it all goes through. And for some reason, the United Nations just proved how useless it is. And to be fair, it has been for the past few decades now. It's just it's just a place where everybody just come and just talk, high-minded and talk with no actual action. Nothing gets done.
The idea that the United Nations Security Council put its stamp of legitimacy on a privatized so-called board, and the charter of that says that Trump remains the chairman even beyond his presidency. And then the first thing that they do is they have Jared Kushner give a presentation, which is for a real estate project that is going to be built on the corpses of tens of thousands of Palestinians who have been murdered in this genocide. So you have the Gaza model, and then they say at it, but this is a model that applies to the rest of the world. So what are they really talking about there? They're saying the United Nations is illegitimate now. We don't need it. That is what they're saying here. And the United Nations just abdicated its moral, ethical, and legal responsibilities by saying, yes, Donald Trump can deploy a private force that will have no UN oversight to speak of with any legitimacy over it. This is an incredible low point in the history of the United Nations.
You've spent 25 years documenting US-American war crimes. Has anyone ever been held accountable, even once? Has the government of the United States come close to being held accountable?
Absolutely not. I mean, what often happens, if you take the Abu Ghraib episode, where American military personnel and intelligence personnel and private contractors were systematically torturing Iraqi prisoners in the early stages of the invasion and occupation of Iraq. It was only the lowest ranking people that ever got hit with any charges to speak of. In fact, when lawsuits have been brought against American officials in U.S. courts, like Donald Rumsfeld, the former defense secretary, for the deaths of detainees at Guantanamo, even under President Barack Obama, his Justice Department intervened in those cases and said that even if everything is true, that Rumsfeld was responsible for kidnapping, torture, extrajudicial killing, it would have been within what they called the official scope of his duties. This was a Obama-era Justice Department memo intervening in a lawsuit that sought to hold the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, responsible for a very clear set of war crimes involving the kidnapping and torture of prisoners who were sent to Guantanamo. Only the lowest-ranking people ever get hit with anything.
Or if you're black, because you can see the only people who have been prosecuted for war crimes are just black African leaders. And for Jeremy Scahill to actually be pointing it out there, the only people that got any kind of prosecution were lower ranking, but the guys at the top will always get protection no matter what they do, even though they have been caught red-handed violating human rights and so on. So watching this, you and I, whoever's watching, you can both agree that this is fairly unbalanced, really.
How much do the US public even know about October 7th? How much do the US public know about US's war in Iran, about its blockade of Cuba? What do they actually hear on their televisions?
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus on Trump, but I think it's more helpful to look at sort of the so-called adults that we were all told need to go back into the room after Trump's, first term. Joe Biden was a man who spent 50 years in office, was probably the single most dedicated Zionist in American politics. When we're looking at American political power, I think that people make themselves feel like they're on the right side of history because I'm opposed to Donald Trump. But you can't be a vegetarian between meals. And I think that if you don't have the honesty or integrity to recognize the sameness of tactics and policy and the wielding of power that exists between the Democrats and the Republicans, you can't have an honest discussion. I remember after 9/11, all the horrors about, Bush and Cheney. And it was a horror period. It was unbelievable. They launched a borderless war on the world. They're doing extrajudicial kidnapping and killing and launching ground invasions and bombings, and it was completely lawless. When we look back now on that, it's almost quaint the way that they approached how things have to be. They were almost like fanatically dedicated to trying to follow the law compared to what now happens, where it's just like, we can just assassinate anyone. We can kidnap heads of state, etc. I mean, I think Dick Cheney, if he was alive today, would just be like looking at Donald Trump and seeing like, why did we waste all this time even pretending that we needed to follow any laws whatsoever?
I know what he's actually saying here is so on the nose, because in those leaders of the past, they were very worried about following the law. Even though they were doing whatever they wanted to do, they at least had the self-respect to go to the hearing to get permission. They wanted legitimacy, essentially, for what they were doing. But now Donald Trump does whatever he wants. He kidnapped Maduro. Is following the Israeli playbook of assassinating leaders, and they're now normalizing it. Like, this isn't normal. You can't just go into a country and just kill the head of state just like that. They're setting precedents for something in the future that we all pray shouldn't happen. And the Geneva Conventions, all these laws were created just to avoid things like this. And in real time, America is going ahead and just decimating all these rules one after the other, and it's so sad. Growing up and learning about international law, the rules, human rights, and the different things that's happened that's made us come to this stage where you're like, oh no, never again, this is not going to happen. And then right in our eyes, all of this is just getting like, it's just getting thrown out the window, essentially.
Because it's so lawless. And Obama deserves credit in a very bad way for having legitimized some of the worst policies that were incubated after 9/11 by Bush and Cheney. He had an opportunity to turn the page on it and to hold people accountable. And instead, what he said about CIA crimes is that we need to look forward, not backward. And the failure to hold those war criminals accountable from the Bush era, for those 2 terms of Bush and Cheney, set the stage so that the Gaza genocide can happen, so that the crimes that the Trump administration is committing can happen. The adults in the room are often the ones that pave the way for people like Donald Trump.
I mean, talking about these targeted assassinations, you would seem that taking out leaders, quote unquote, has now become completely normalized. How did we get here? The Iranians might point to the Epstein files, and they've in fact begun to remark and refer to the United States government as the Epstein regime. Is that relevant at all as you think about the sameness between Democrats and Republicans?
I follow the reporting on Epstein. I have colleagues at DROPSITE that have done some of the best reporting on the Israel angle with Epstein. But my take on it is this, that in a way, part of the reason that the public imagination is so captured by Epstein is that it's there's a kind of scandalous nature to it. It involves very serious allegations about human trafficking, about horrid sexual abuse to minors, but also the political intrigue components of it, and the fact that Epstein very clearly had these deep connections with multiple governments, powerful people, the very power elite. So I understand why it captures the imagination. I understand why the Iranians focused on that a lot, saying that it's us versus the Epstein regime. But I think on a deeper level, the real scandal of this is that what it is an indication of what is visible in plain sight, that we don't need to see Epstein's private emails to understand, and that is that there is an elite group of leaders that are constantly, as part of a system they built, conspiring to wage these wars, conspiring to steal natural resources from the rest of the world, are operating in dishonest and seditious ways behind the scenes against, in an effort to overthrow basic democratic principle.
Like when this war started, when America designated the name of this war, Operation Epic Fury, journalist Max Blumenthal went on Twitter and said Operation Epstein Fury. And this blew up. The whole of it just started calling it that Operation Epstein Fury. And this is so funny because they now refer to the Trump administration, as the Epstein regime. And this is so telling on how much America standing in the world has been. Like the whole world has reeled from this scandal. You can see, like, in the UK, there's been a couple of people that have stepped down. In order, I think in Norway or Denmark, a couple of people have stepped down. But not one person in America has faced any kind of justice in this. Howard Lutnick, who said, "Oh, I never saw this guy in deposition in the Congress," was like, "I never saw this guy." And then when the truth came out, when the files came out, it was like, "Oh, I only saw him just once." And you can just see that these lies is just going on and on. And at the root cause of it, here you have Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein. He knew all these people, these elites are there. He knows them, and they're all conspiring. And you can see how they were just going in the emails. If you go through it, you can see in the emails how they're just going on about what they're going to do about this war, that place. And even Israeli former Prime Minister Ehud Barak as well was spending nights at the Epstein's place. It's just very crazy, and it points to the decay in American society as it is right now.
It's all out in the open for us to see. And so in a sense, the Epstein releases made something tangible for people. But I look at it and say, I'm not surprised that this group of people are documented in these files, because we've seen what they've been doing for decades.
If there is something different, though, about the kind of March 2026 moment, about watching Iran respond, compete with the US-Israeli attack on them, for me, it's what's happening with the Gulf states, who have, of course, been victims of Iran's retaliatory attacks. Iranian drones and missiles have struck targets in Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. And I do believe that there's a rising anger in these states that the US has done little to shield them, and while it has done, on the other hand, a great deal to protect Israel. Do you think this has shaken the Gulf states' relationship to the United States at all?
Let's back up a little bit here. You have Iran engaging in an unprecedented level of diplomacy with GCC countries, and there was a sort of rapprochement that was setting in that was very disturbing to Benjamin Netanyahu, and that was very disturbing to certain elements of the U.S. political class. And I think it was to Netanyahu's advantage to try to create a dynamic where it appears as though the war is between Iran and the GCC countries. And part of what we saw happen after the February 28th bombs started falling is that Iran did exactly what it said it was going to do, which was to launch retaliatory strikes against military facilities or other facilities that are connected in some way to the U.S. military, not just in Israel, but also in the Persian Gulf. This was a war started by the United States and Israel when Iran was in the middle of negotiating and putting on the table terms that went beyond the 2015 JCPOA nuclear agreement under Obama. And so, yes, there is a legitimate discussion to be had about some of the places that Iran hit in GCC countries. Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, actually issued an apology that they say was aimed at collateral damage that took place. But what Iran is saying is we will not apologize for striking these military facilities. If part of your analysis doesn't involve owning the fact that the United States and Israel started this war and that Iran said it was going to do this, then you're not really being honest about it.
Does it matter then that the script or the narrative is shifting, or if not shifting, from Iran, the big enemy in the region, to at least Israel, emboldened by the developments of the last few months, being much more brazen about the Greater Israel Project, or much more honest about the Greater Israel Project? At the end of March 2026, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said, this war has to end with different borders, different Israeli borders, and the new Israeli border must be the Litani River, which is a change to Lebanon. But does this change the calculus?
Well, you also have a U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who appears to believe that when you're the ambassador to Israel, you become like an Israeli official. And he says on Tucker Carlson's program under questioning that it's perfectly acceptable for Israel to aspire to a greater Israel that extends from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So we're talking about huge swaths of sovereign Arab states that the U.S. ambassador co-signed as a legitimate objective for Israel to conquer. So I mean, this is not just rhetoric. Benjamin Netanyahu is at the apex of his career. He believes that he has a clock ticking on this Trump administration where Israel will never again get this level of open support and have a greater ability to manipulate American power. And I would imagine that if years from now you and I sit again together, that we'll look back.
This point Jeremy Scare is actually bringing up here is actually a very poignant point because right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is literally, this is the last time he knows that he's going to have this much support from the United States because opinion polls in America right now shows Israel is at the lowest it's ever been compared to how it's been before. You now have more people in America now supporting the Palestinians against the Israelis. And as you know, the people that are going to be going into politics next are going to be people under 40, under 50, which have a very negative view of Israel right now. So Netanyahu knows that this support that they're currently getting right now is on its last legs. So he basically rented out the United States military to fly alongside them in Iran to destroy it as much as they can. And once that is done, he can say, oh, I have done it. I have changed the Middle East for Israel. And look at us now. But at what cost though? The cost Israel is paying right now is enormous. All over the world, we can see the South Korean prime ministers giving out like strong condemnations, especially the Spanish prime minister as well. He's been the forefront of this kind of condemnation. He's just saying like what Israel is doing right now, the human rights violations, the way they engage in war. They killed over 300 people in Lebanon on Wednesday. This is just crazy. And this was all in plan to topple the current ceasefire deal that is happening right now in Pakistan. So only time will tell how this all plays out. But yeah, that's been the video, guys. Thank you very, very much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way. And I will catch you in the next one.